All right. Is this my first live? No, it's not actually. You missed quite a few lives. that would be, this would be what? My fifth live, somewhere around there. I did quite a few already. You missed quite a few. But if you're interested in seeing some of what I spoke about in the previous lives, you could go on my YouTube channel. My YouTube channel is Nathan Springer. You search that and my YouTube channel should pop up, and some of the discussions in the previous lives would be partly there at least. Merry Christmas to all. Merry Christmas. Whoa, bro, your IQ may be 100. Okay, let me, oh, 1000. That's a correction. 100 is the average IQ, generally speaking. 100 means the majority of people are right there. Over 100 is generally above average. Under 100, you're struggling a bit. All right, what going on, Boosty? Okay, what we're talking about today, a very interesting article. Earlier on in this month, our CMO, our Chief Medical Officer, made an announcement. Some of our hospitals, some of our mortuaries, some of the morgues are becoming full. They're overflowing because of the number of COVID-19 patients that have died, that have unfortunately passed, and some of the morgues are becoming full. And they announced a decision that they're going to open a storage facility out in Freeport. Now, I myself, I am close to that vicinity also. So that was interesting to hear, but also interesting was the residents wanted no part of it. And I saw some people were criticizing the residents that they're not willing to make the sacrifice for the country. And what is a body storage site going to do? It's not like it's going to negatively affect them. And okay, I understand that argument, but I also understand the residents opening up a storage facility for bodies that have passed because of COVID-19 is a kind of iffy and scary thing. And I could fully understand why you wouldn't want that in your neighborhood. A Guardian article, mass storage unit for COVID victims in Freeport. Bocaro residents send legal letter to CMO for full disclosure. Residents of Bocaro have sent a legal letter to the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Roshan Parasram, requesting full disclosure on the proposed establishment of a mass storage facility for dead COVID-19 victims at Bocaro in Freeport. The letter, which was dated December 25th, so they sent that letter out dated for Christmas, was sent by representing attorney Kiel Taklal Singh. Now, if you're someone like me who generally reads a bit of news, you keep up with some of the news, you'd recognize certain names and certain names of certain attorneys. This attorney, Mr. Taklal Singh, is a familiar attorney when speaking about things pertaining to the opposition leader, to the UNC, not the opposition leader, the opposition party, to the UNC. He's a familiar, generally speaking, UNC familiar lawyer. So that's one lean in this. But it's not totally surprising because the Freeport district would be in Couva North, I believe, and be under UNC representation. So you can't really blame UNC lawyers for making themselves handy for UNC constituents. That's understandable. Taklal Singh is acting alongside several other lawyers. The attorney referred to a press conference held on December 18th, where the CMO made the announcement of this new facility that they're going to open, right? While the exact location was not disclosed at that time, at the same press conference, Parasram reportedly stated, "We are looking to establish a mass site for storage in the Freeport area, which should be coming in stream shortly, and additional sites within different funeral agencies for storage." That is being led through the Ministry of Health, the Chief Public Health Inspector, as well as the Director of Veterinary Public Health. Okay, interesting. Parasram further indicated at the said press conference that a memorandum of understanding would soon be completed and the details would be disclosed to the public. However, Taklal Singh noted that to date, no further details of the said memorandum have been disclosed, and our client and his community remain in the dark with respect to the specifics of the proposed mass storage site. So they sent out a letter to the CMO a pre-action protocol letter, basically. It's a letter telling you that we have intention of taking some legal action on this matter, and there are several things we would like you to address before we make that next step to actually take the legal steps going forward. And some of the things they want addressed would be, let's go along. Some of the things they have in their pre-action protocol. They want the full details and extent of the operations to be conducted at the mass storage site. That's fair enough. They want the full details. A copy of the memorandum of understanding, existing draft or completed version between the ministry and any third party with respect to the storage site. They want any applications to the statutory bodies, or because what one of the councillors for the district was saying is, if they're intending to do this in this area, they would obviously need some kind of town and country planning for this. You don't just go and do random things in random buildings any way you want. You generally have a way and a method to get things done. And you can understand people in a community. If you're living somewhere, you're in your community, you're familiar with the people around you, and you hear from government officials, people you may have never met in your life before, you hear from them that they plan to open a mass storage site for COVID bodies in your neighborhood. And you never heard anything about this before. No one came to you and discussed anything. No one had any kind of consultation in the village. You didn't know anything about this. All you know is this announcement was made and this is supposed to happen. Bodies are supposed to come piling in here. That's kind of scary. It have to go somewhere, and that's understandable. Empress Roni is saying that it has to go somewhere. That is true. The bodies have to go somewhere. Fine. But when you're talking about government officials making the decision on where to carry the bodies, why don't they put it in their luxury communities? How could the decision be made above without any consultation in someone's community, and you say, well, the bodies have to go somewhere, so let's put them there? Our Minister of Health lives in Valsane. Why don't they lease one of the buildings in Valsane? Or there's some empty property in Valsane. Bring in some portable frozen storage facilities and store all of the dead bodies in Valsane, or carry it to where's Dr. Rowley's residence? Not necessarily the Prime Minister's residence. I believe he lives somewhere Blue Range or somewhere in the West like that. Why don't you think they won't carry it there? So okay, the bodies do have to go somewhere. That's understandable. But why is it by someone else's community? You're choosing without consultation to just put dead bodies from an infectious disease into someone else's community. Now, I will say from the very jump of this, I don't think there's much risk, if any, of spreading COVID-19 from these unfortunately deceased people. And as someone rightfully pointed out, the bodies do have to go somewhere, so that's understandable. But it's also very understandable when you live in a community, you're living there. You're not just going to feel dandy about a mass body storage site being opened next to you. And I think some of the people who pretend like they can't understand why these residents will be getting on so selfishly, they're lying to themselves. If a mass body storage site opens in your neighbor's property, you won't like that idea. It didn't even have to be about COVID-19. Just bodies in general is something people, since the beginning of time, since humans began walking the earth, having fellow dead bodies in too close proximity hasn't generally been something people get enthusiastic about. People don't generally go living directly in a cemetery or next to it. If the virus is that contagious, the government should be disposed immediately. I'm not sure I fully understand what you mean there. On Friday, Health Minister Terence Dialsing promised the Bukhara residents that their concerns will be addressed as soon as possible, given the fact that they have legitimate concerns of the proposed cold storage unit in their area to house COVID-19 bodies. Dayal Singh said he saw the reports about the residents voicing their concerns during an urgent meeting that was held in their community on Thursday, and said that he subsequently spoke to Belgrove, president of the funeral home. Mr. Belgrove will be having a meeting with them because we take joint responsibility for that. The Ministry of Health and the funeral homes, he has scheduled a meeting with them at their earliest convenience, and he will be addressing all their legitimate concerns. So what the Minister of Health is saying is that this idea, this proposal, isn't only through the Ministry of Health. There's a private side to this. The funeral homes themselves would be facilitating some of this. Makes sense also. Blessed night, Mr. Blessed by God. Season's greetings, sea, sky, nature. All right. And then there's a caveat to all of this though, because there's a religious component. And the truth be told, I did a video on my YouTube channel quite some time ago, maybe about 2 or 3 months, and it was on the difficulty with running multicultural nations, multicultural communities. Because when you have various cultures trying to work all in the same direction, work in unison to get one goal done, it becomes a bit difficult because each culture may have different views of specific parts of life. They may have a different way they would see, a different thing they may have as their ultimate goal. So here's this. The SDMS, the Sanatan Dharma Mahasabha, which is a Hindu organization here, they said they've joined in this commotion. The SDMS is against this proposed cold storage site. In a statement on Thursday, the SDMS criticized the proposed cold storage site. The release came after the Bukhara residents had their meeting. It noted that it finds the move appalling that the Minister of Health, the Chief Medical Officer, and the Funeral Practitioners Association appear to feel satisfied that the facility for the mass storage for corpses in Freeport is the solution for overflowing morgues and funerals. The SDMS said they have failed to appreciate that more storage capacity is not what the Hindu community is asking for. We are now learning that in the present arrangement, COVID-19 corpses may have deteriorated in storage, and we are not clear how many misidentified bodies have been issued to the wrong families. That is some scary stuff. Personally, to have the tragedy of losing someone in this time already, and then have tragedy on top of tragedy where these kind of things could happen to bodies, that's tough. If the number of deaths exceed the storage capacity of 200 to 300 corpses, then the futility of this exercise will be immediately apparent, it added. What the SDMS is saying there is, okay, even if you create more of this cold storage, you can store more bodies. Anytime you have an increase in, not necessarily an increase in the deaths, but you have the continuous overflowing of the deaths, and it reaches that 200 to 300 threshold again, the same cold storage facility would then be filled again, and you'd have to find another substitute. So here's what the SDMS is saying. What they want is to make the distinction between storage and proper disposal of dead bodies. The former can never substitute for the latter. And that's true. When people have died, you have to do something to get rid of the bodies. You cannot in perpetuity just store more and more bodies. It just doesn't work like that. To be clear, it's against the Hindu tradition to store dead bodies and or delay cremation, it said. The SDMS reiterated that they have been asking repeatedly that they be given the bodies of their loved ones for timely cremation, but added that their concerns have been systematically ignored both by the CMO and the Ministry of Health. The SDMS finds the present arrangement short-sighted and distasteful and a deliberate disregard for the religious tenets of the Hindu community, the SDMS said. And that's so interesting because the present Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Parisram, according to word on the street from this region itself, I believe he may very well be a close relative of a pundit in the Hindu community. So that's some interesting friction there. And this has been a running story. I don't understand what's going on here. I honestly am not quite sure why the government continues insisting on not allowing the cremation, the open air cremation of COVID-19 victims. They seem adamant on that. But internationally, when you look at multiple places where they generally go along with open air cremation, now bear in mind, as I was speaking about multiculturalism, many places you go, they actually forbid open air cremation. And if you speak about open air cremation in some countries and in some cultures, it may sound kind of very strange that a body, so wait, you have a body open just on a pyre and you light it a fire? To some people, that would sound very, very strange. Good night, Shui. Good night to you. And I honestly am not very sure why they don't simply release the bodies and allow them to do open cremation, because I have seen some of the viral experts, some of the epidemiologists from the SDMS had some experts speak on it. And they've said already that in burning a corpse, there's no risk of spreading the disease. So I am honestly confused. But even in walking around it, there isn't risk. It's not, to get a little macabre with it. Someone said there in the Hindu cremation they like to walk around the corpse. But even still, it's not like a corpse is going to cough on you or sneeze on you or anything. I mean, I don't think there's even remotely one small chance of spreading that COVID. Now, to everyone in the chat, I've said this before, I like my chat to be engaging, etc., etc. Please don't spam the chat. You could say regular things and have discussions, etc., even have feisty discussions, but let's not spam the chat. All right. So that was on the Freeport residents that really aren't too interested in this business about the funeral home ending up in, not the funeral home, the storage site ending up in their community. Am I first? Sir Hole, you're not first. You're certainly not first. All right, Empress Rooney, I'm genuinely confused as to why not release the bodies right away. Me too. Me too. I am not sure of the exact reason, and they have not given a reason. They really haven't. They haven't stated a reason to the community, to the Hindu community. They haven't specified what exactly they are worried about. And I think it's fair enough in a country like Trinidad and Tobago, where I believe it's somewhere like 30% of our population around there are Hindus. It may be fair to at least give a justification for the decision. And I am yet to see one. I am yet to see one. And that's just the thing I find with the entirety of COVID and all the things around it. What happens and what continues happening with everyone else is that people do seek their own interest. People, I don't know about the Muslims per se. I haven't seen many Muslims argue about anything in it. But I found that interesting also, because I'm aware that in Islam you have to bury very quickly also. So I'm not sure how that all works out. I'd like to see someone in the Muslim community who is familiar with how the COVID-19 arrangements are going. If they could message me and tell me, or drop something in the chat and let me know. All right, here's something interesting. I find, as I was saying, many things in and around the pandemic, most people are basically seeking their own interest. And even in times when they're talking about the multiple interests of the entire group, most of the times when they're seeking the interest of the group, it's because that interest also lines up with them. Good night. So even if certain practices need be restricted, like walking around the body, can't that be restricted? That's a very good point. I find many of the rules in the pandemic lean around some of that line. Like when I heard about the pandemic rule where if you're with someone in your vehicle, you and them alone, and you're married to that person, if you don't wear a mask, you could still end up with a ticket. That really doesn't make sense. And the excuse I heard, I believe, I can't remember if it was the Attorney General or the Minister of National Security, was like, well, the police won't know. Like, oh, how difficult is it to ascertain that? And similarly, if you could just make some conditionalities around something and allow it to go on, I wouldn't have a problem in that. That's the cholera outbreak. The COVID-19 pandemic is not the same thing as cholera. All right, so the Titi Chamber and AmCham Titi in support of the government stance on vaccination for public servants. And I wasn't surprised when I saw this. The business communities are in support of the government stance. They're agreeing with the government in pushing forward the not vaccine mandates. The government isn't calling it vaccine mandates. And someone again in one of the contemplation chats was again saying that it's not a mandate because they have a choice. They're not being forced because they have a choice. Now, as I said in the previous live, I again find that ridiculous. If I put a gun to your head and I say, you have to give me your money, yes, you do have a choice. You don't have to give me your money. You could die, you could run away, you could try to fight me, you could do all kind of different things. But you're understanding that it would still be called force because the choices I'm giving you are all extremely unpleasant. Similarly, if you tell somebody, you have to do this or else you won't be paid and you'd lose your job. Yes, they do have a choice. Yes, of course they do have a choice. But the choices aren't very pleasant. So in general colloquial language, you would call that forcing. If I tell you, if you don't do this, I'll fire you, I am attempting to force you something. But they don't like to call it that, so they'll call it their safe zone policies and whatever else they'd call it. But the business community is in agreement with this, and as I said, I wasn't surprised. And at the end of this article, you'd see one of the reasons I really wasn't surprised at this. In an immediate response to the Prime Minister's press conference on Saturday, the Chamber said the dire COVID infection and death rates, along with the low vaccination rates of the public sector, has left the government with no choice but to create the environment to have the public sector vaccinated, and therefore, as a responsible employer and as a responsible government, they must take decisions deemed to protect their employees and the population. The Chamber added, the point of these interventions is not to restrict personal freedoms. It is to preserve them and prevent lockdowns or heavier restrictions. And I think this is actually the main point of the business community. What the business community wants is they don't want their stores to be closed again. Lockdowns are worse on the business owners than on the employees, If you're a business owner and you have rent to pay, you have a lot of overhead costs. You may have some mortgages, some loans outstanding. When your business is running, your turnover might cover all of those overhead costs and you may be living in luxury. But if your business has to shut down and it has to shut down for a regular period, an elongated period of time, it's going to become a lot more difficult. Those costs are going to start to pile up. So the business community, nearly the entire intent of the business community is we don't want any more lockdowns. So anything necessary to make sure that the country isn't locked down again, the business community wants it. So it's not necessarily that the business community is looking and saying that it is really about the health and well-being of the nation. Not saying that I'm not saying they're selfish and they want people to die, but really and truly, what they're looking for is their own interests. And that's only fair. They're seeking their interests. But here's another integral part in this. The business community went on. The TT Chamber of Commerce and the American Chamber of Commerce in Trinidad and Tobago, they said, we hope that these measures combined with responsible individual behavior will result in fewer deaths and lower infection rates as a result of COVID-19. But here's the added. We also look forward to the inclusion of the private sector in the legislation that will be brought to the Parliament so that businesses will also have the legal clarity to designate their facilities as safe zones. In case you didn't quite get what they're saying there, they're looking forward to the government bringing forward legislation because the government's plan isn't just to do this randomly. They're planning to bring forward legislation to legislate this safe zone within the public service. And the business community's hope is that within this legislation, they outline some kind of measure that would allow private businesses to do likewise. Because if you were following from the last live or if you watched the last YouTube video, you would have seen where there has already been an injunction against one private company that sent home some of their unvaccinated workers. You see, there's a kind of legal gray zone when it comes to what private businesses can really do about unvaccinated workers. It isn't that obvious. It isn't a settled question. The court still has yet to rule on it. And as far as the president of the industrial court goes, that's the person in charge of the court that is in charge of labor disputes. She has already said that you can't just change someone's contract. So there's that caveat there, and that's the balance of it. And I think that's part of the interest that the business community has in this also. They would like that the government makes it clear that they could do some of their own safety measures on their own, some of their own safe zone measures. How can a government legislate choice but mandate operations? How is a strange question. You'd have to ask the government how they can do it, because apparently they're doing it. Is it that private citizens need be vaccinated to access the public services? Now, I don't know. But I highly doubt they're going to say that, because that would get into very ticklish territory. But if you're creating a safe zone, and the rules in a safe zone is everyone entering must be vaccinated. I am not sure, but that's curious. The Trinidad and Tobago Unified Teachers Association tutor raised that point earlier. They were saying when they were agreeing with their fellow unions about this whole safe zone thing that they're resisting being mandated to be vaccinated, they were saying that how could you make the schools a safe zone? And now the case is that you would have unvaccinated students in the school. If the school is a safe zone for the teachers, you're telling the teachers they must be vaccinated to enter the school. Then wouldn't that also trickle down to the students? And in case anyone forgot, we did try that before. We initially had a vaccine mandate for the students. You had to be vaccinated to go to physical school. You had to be vaccinated to go to physical school. But we squashed that. We squashed that because we realized that the students were the ones losing out in the end. And if you have students losing out on schooling and you have them missing classes, the trickle-down effect for your country and your society in the next couple of years is going to be disastrous. So when we figured that out, we realized that, and the Minister of Education eventually turned it around and said all students, whether unvaccinated or not, can enter schools. So if now you're going to change the rules that in order for teachers to enter the school compound, they must be vaccinated. And it's a safe zone. What's going to happen to the students? Very interesting question. All right. Yes, students have to be vaccinated, standard 1 to 5 and form 1 to 5. Where did you hear that, Mr. Sea Sky Nature? I am yet to see any instruction on that. And I tend to believe that our government isn't going to go in that direction because they already tried it. They tried going in that direction and it did not work. It just didn't work. It wasn't functional, because here's the thing. You're saying that you want to do that to keep the students safe. Okay, understandable. Even though the stats say that they aren't at a very high risk of the virus, but okay. But what is the result for the students who decide they're not going to be vaccinated? And bear in mind where the majority of these students may very well come from. They may come from some of the lower level, the lower income level parts of society, some of the parts of society that are already seeing increased oppression. So if they're coming from that part of society and you're saying, well, you have to be vaccinated in order to go to school, many people are going to be like, well, whatever, I'm not going to go to school. Fine by me. I didn't want to go to school anyway. And who does that benefit? When you have this whole group of children now home with nothing else to do, you know what they're going to do? Find things to do. And the things they're going to find to do generally aren't going to be things that make the general society happy. They aren't going to be things that cause peace and beauty in our general society. Generally speaking, they may be led down wayward paths. And then you'd see a booming in the gang activity in our country. And if you're looking right now, there is a booming in the gang activity in our country. And when you're looking at the people who are dying, they aren't old people. Regularly, you're seeing teens and young 20s. That's what happens. That's what happens. So, okay, you keep your vaccine mandate. We're going to force them to be vaccinated to come into school. Okay, great, grand, right. Now, how do you feel about that? A decade down the road, when criminals are running through the streets because they had nothing to do but do crime for the last 10 years. That's just not a good idea. Okay, no, no crap, Jerry. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. Ask your question. What's the question you have to ask there? Are they going to ask for vaccines to ride the bus? I highly doubt that. If they don't want to go anyways, they're still going to take that road. But you see, here's the difference with that Empress Rooney. If they don't want to go, they weren't going to go anyway. But here's the difference in that. There are already legal protections and legal consequences for children missing school. If you keep your child out of school for over a certain period of time, chances are you'd be visited by someone from the Child Protective Services or the social services. There's a law against that. You can't just keep your child out of school. If your child isn't registered for school, then you have to go get permission from the Minister of Education to register to homeschool your child. And they don't just give that permission just so. You have to have really good reason to keep your child out of school. That's already a law in our country. So what it would provide if you have a vaccine policy for school is it provides a way around that law. And it negates the law and forgets the initial reason a law like that would have been created in the first place. You wanted all the children in school. It helps our society. All right. Would children start to prefer online school than in face? Some already do. Not all will, but some will. And personally, I think that parents should be paying more attention during this time. They should be paying really close attention to understand and see where their child flourishes, where their child does best, and maybe your child does best in the online learning environment, because that may happen. All children aren't the same. But the thing is, most children, especially the younger children, generally need some face-to-face learning. So if you're doing online schooling, very likely you'd still have to get some kind of physical in-person learning. If the parent is capable of that, that might be splendid. But yes, I think some children already began to prefer online learning. All right. What exactly are safe zones? Because in reality, there are no safe zones. Everyone mixes every day. That's true, but what safe zones are is safe zones are a way for AmCham and the business groups to have a way to open their businesses. So we have a policy that says we're trying to do something to stop the spread of this virus, and because of that, we can open. But if there was no safe zone policy, generally speaking, how government functions is they very likely would not have allowed these businesses to function. Because you're a teenager yourself and you're in love with online schooling. I am not surprised. I am not surprised. And the thing is, I did a contemplation on that, and I think I asked the question, and in the comments you saw some people preferred in-person schooling, some people preferred online schooling. Now, even if you prefer online school and you now have to return to physical school, that doesn't mean you have to give up on online schooling. I happen to know someone who does quite a lot of online classes. Basically, they have an online school themselves, and you could go register for that and enjoy yourself in online school. And online schooling does provide certain unique opportunities, and I find the fact that it seems like it's moving up with the time, it seems like you're trying to create something new and make a new system as we get new technology. I find that crucial. I don't like the idea that we'd have new technologies and we'd still be doing everything the same way we did it for the last 100 years. Some things should be tweaked and we would get some benefit from it being tweaked. The Nuremberg Code, That's very interesting, and I agree with the most of it, and some of this does seem to go against it. Now, within one of the articles I pulled up, a former public administration minister had a comment to make on the government's method to going about this. She deemed it to be a communications failure. And personally, I agree with that. I think a lot of what is going on around these vaccines, the vaccine mandates, the vaccine hesitancy, has a lot to do with communication failure. And the method some people go at in attempting to resolve the communication failures that have already happened don't seem to be working. Some of these methods seem to be driving the wedge deeper. So when you insult someone, first up, insulting and mockery, it generally doesn't get people to change their mind. If you believe whatever you believe, and I say, well, the first thing is all the anti-vaxxers is done see head. And then I come and tell you, well, come do this thing. It's going to be really beneficial for you. You aren't going to believe me. You aren't going to trust me. And that's some of the problems in communication. Now, let's see what she says. Former Public Administration Minister Dr. Rujwati Nangosain Ramgulam and university lecturer in management studies blames the government for an ineffective communication policy, which has resulted in a large part of the population being unwilling to be vaccinated. Now, here's my caveat on that. I don't think it's fair and reasonable to blame our government exclusively, because vaccine hesitancy isn't something unique to Trinidad and unique to Trinidadians. There's vaccine hesitancy all around the world, in some of the most unlikely places. And I think in most of the cases where there is vaccine hesitancy, what has happened is a fall down in communication. While she told the Sunday Guardian that she is pro-vaccine, she believes the method the government is using to get public servants to be vaccinated is the wrong one. I am worried about the public service. With human beings, you do not use the carrot and stick approach. That approach was in the days of slavery. The slaves were not allowed to think. Now in modern times, we have schooled and educated. We are schooled and educated. Our leadership styles and communication styles must change. Now, here's the very interesting thing I find about this. I don't know how many of you are repeat people from the lives, but I believe it could have been 2 or 3 lives ago I spoke about the carrot and the stick method. And I said that is what they're trying to do here. They have a stick and then they're trying to reward you with a carrot. And humans don't generally go well with that stick. Yes, they may lean towards the carrot, but the stick part, people don't react well to it. And if they have the power to resist you, when you're waving that stick at them, they would generally do it. All right, there are countries with... Good night, Mr. Farid Mohammed. All right, and yes, the next part of it is the reward. If the reward seems to be your rights, then that seems to be a difficult thing. You can't reward me with something that is supposed to be my God-given rights. That doesn't add up. So the carrot and the stick method generally just doesn't work, and it seems like the government very often is reinforcing this method. You'd see glimpses of something come up, and then very quickly it would transform back into the same carrot and stick. Someone issuing some kind of threat, someone trying to be a little trying to have a little mockery on it, and it just doesn't work. It really just doesn't work. But they're trying to change some of those methods. And I found it interesting to see some of the new methods they're using to try and convince some of these people to take vaccines. And one of the most important groups to convince, I said this previously also, one of the most important groups to convince are the protective services. Because remember, if you cannot convince the protective services, then you can't really run the state. The protective services are the enforcement arm of the state. So if you don't have that enforcement, you can't enforce. So the protective services are very important. And to rehash that, they're less than 50% vaccinated. So I don't think it's possible to fire more than 50% of your your protective services that are in the public service grouping. the methods they're using now have reached down to pleading. Take the shot. Acting Commissioner of Police pleads with unvaccinated police. This is from the Christmas Express paper. This take the vaccine, please. This was the plea to police officers, soldiers, and others in the protective services from the heads of the country's national security apparatus yesterday amid staggering numbers of COVID deaths and infections in the country. And you had the Commissioner of Police, you had the head of the Defense Force, a good bit of them. They were there in some one of their meetings that they had there, and they were pleading with their officers, please just take that vaccine. But here's my thing. I don't think pleading works right now. And I don't think pleading works right now because the people who are still unvaccinated aren't that way because they listen to pleading. Many people have pleaded before and they're still saying no. So I'm not sure how many people will listen to just the plain pleading. But here's part of the problem as I see it. Part of the problem in the approach that some people use for the vaccinated. According to our Minister of National Security, what he said when speaking about this to the protective services, how he addressed this is he said he was embarrassed. Minister Hines, who also spoke at yesterday's function, said these figures were nothing short of embarrassing to him. I urge you on behalf of the government, I was very embarrassed when the Prime Minister read out about 2 weekends ago for the nation to see the vaccine uptake status for all the divisions of national security. I must say it was embarrassing. And here's the thing. I don't think many officers in the protective services care. They don't care about embarrassing you. What does your embarrassment do to them? When someone tells you that something you've done has embarrassed them, the people that generally tell you that and have some sway over you are people like your parents, your grandparents, your auntie, someone who you actually care about their view and their embarrassment. You don't want to bring shame to your father's name. So if he tells you, son, I am embarrassed, then that has some weight on it. But the Minister of National Security coming and telling these big grown men in a function that what you all did, the low vaccine rate, has really embarrassed me. I just don't think that would have any sway on them. All right. Let me get to another point, seeing as some people have been asking about this. One of the points that the police officers raised, that they wanted in exchange for, okay, we'd get vaccinated. One of the points they raised, and I think this may be one of the most crucial points and one of the most pertinent points. They said they want the government to take liability. If they are to take this vaccine, they're saying that the government must take liability. And if any one of them gets ill or has an adverse effect, the government must pay for all of their healthcare measures and must take care of their family after. Now, here's the thing. I kind of agree with that. I don't see where that is wrong. I don't see where that goes wrong. Because if you're trying to convince these men that the vaccine is safe and effective and it's the best thing for you to take right now, you need to go and take this vaccine and it won't do you anything adverse, then I think liability is a fair thing. If someone is afraid of this, if you tell them that in case of any eventuality, we take liability for it, then you have more grounds to stand on. But if you say then that we don't want to take that liability, that starts to sound a bit fishy. People could rightfully wonder that is everything above board here? And they did make that point, and the Attorney General addressed that. The Attorney General pointed out also that some of the protective services are asking for money. They're saying straight up, basically, give us a bonus, give us some reward, and more people would take this. In other words, don't use more of the stick, give us some more carrots. More carrots, less stick, and you get more people to do it. But and maybe that might be true. There are some places that offer, I believe, where was it? St. Kitts and Antigua in the earlies was offering, I think, a parcel of land, and they were offering some free KFC chicken or something of the sort. So, but here's the problem with giving inducements to get people to take the vaccine. If you give all the people who are still yet unvaccinated, you give them $2,000 as a reward bonus to go take the vaccine. What is that going to tell all of the people who already took the vaccine? Then you're going to have to give them all the $2,000. That reward would have to be across the board. And if it happens to look like you're rewarding negative behavior, because it could be considered by some that not getting vaxxed in time may be negative behavior. And if it looks like you're rewarding that, what does that do to the society? If it is that the booster shots come and you're saying everyone has to get a booster shot, then if I looked out and I saw that you paid the last group of people to take their vaccines, and now you're telling me that I have to take a booster shot, I think I'm going to get smart. And I'm going to decide, well, I would rock back and wait till they come to pay me too. All right, let's see what the Attorney General revealed about it there. All right. Police Service and Welfare head Gideon Dixon told Newsday other Caribbean countries had given financial incentives to officers to get vaccinated, and governments and corporations in developed countries had partnered to incentivize people to get vaccinated. Because there's a general mistrust based on so much information out there, you can add incentives for persons to come out and increase the vaccination rate. I just don't think that's feasible. You could try it, but I don't think it's a sustainable idea. As I said, you'd be incentivizing what you consider to be bad behavior, and if ever you have to get something done again, it's going to be more difficult to get it done the second time. You're going to have to pay them again, and pay them more that time, very likely. You could correlate that now with incentivizing officers who haven't been vaccinated. Everybody could get it, but more so for the officers who haven't taken the vaccine. I don't know. It is brainstorming ideas that could increase the vaccination rate. That was the head of the Police Welfare Association, basically the police's union. Dixon also hoped for an education/outreach campaign featuring professionals, including retirees, to visit his officers in their stations in collaboration with the government. And I think this is where some of the most help would be done. Sit down and speak to some people. Maybe some might find it too much work to be done. Who needs to go through all of this to get to change some people's mind? Well, okay, that's your view. But I think that's generally how it's done. Standing at a podium and shouting things and making generalized statements doesn't generally change many people's minds. And I don't think it would have much hope to do it in the future. So if public servants strike, what then? I don't know. I'm not sure. It's according to which public servants strike and how many of them strike. It's so unfair. Protected services, teachers and nurses are always given special treatment. Look at HDC. And that was the one I was waiting for. Because that's the thing. If in order to get the public service to vaccinate, when you look out as a citizen of Trinidad, you look out because we're monitoring what's going on here. We're sitting and we're watching. And you notice, wait, in order to get the public servants vaccinated, they basically got a fortune. Everything just went in their favor. And that's one of the curses of this country and the style of our government. The style of governance we have because we created a country built around this kind of public service mentality, and the government has so much say and the government is taking care of you so much. when public servants start to act up, governments like they lose sanity. One of the things that always I it kind of bothers me because it's not generally how things function, and it may be controversial to some, but if you think about it practically, that's not how companies function. When Carney closed down, because the company was running on a bus, they were stealing from the company while they were in the company. The sailors on the boat were stealing the wood from the boat, and Carney had to shut down. When Carney shut down, every worker got hundreds of thousands of dollars. Then they got a house lot. Then they got 2 acres of farmland. Now, I'm not an envious person. I'm not jealous. And good for you. I'm happy for you. But when you think about a country running, how can a country run when any state business that closes down, the country must sell out billions of its assets to reward them so that they don't get angry with the government? That is ridiculous. And if the case is now that the government must be forking out money, they must be paying lump sums to these public servants, they must create alternative healthcare routines, they give the public servants the promise that they're holding liability for them, then what is to happen to the private citizens? Who holds my liability? It was insisted that I do the right thing for my country and I get vaccinated. And now, if something adverse happens to a private citizen, there's no consequence to that. But these public servants can get all of these benefits. It's really not a very fair thing. And it seems to insinuate the incentive it puts in the country is that if you really want a good job, go work in the public sector. And the problem with that is the public sector is the most inefficient sector in our country. So if you're encouraging all of our workers, if you really want the rewards of this country's patrimony, you have to go work in the public sector. You're taking all the efficiency from the private sector and running it into the public sector and saying, yes, go stay there. That's what the encouragement says. And I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think a country runs properly like that. All right, where were we? Okay. Other than the protective services, I was saying previously, I think the main difficulty the government is going to have is with the protective services. Because, as I said, if you don't have the enforcement arm, you can't enforce. And I still stand with that. Probably the main problem they might have is with the protective services. But another very large problem they're going to face is, if you listen to today's contemplation, nurses. Nurses are public servants also, at least in the scheme of the way the government framed it. And I'm not sure how you're going to tackle all these nurses. It's not an easy thing to do. Hold up, in that chat, I'm only seeing 2.1k likes. The last time it ended at somewhere like 17,000 likes. We can't just have 2.1. We have to send up those likes. Make sure you're clicking that like button. Make sure you're tapping that like button. Send it up much higher. Smash up the like button. We need to increase those numbers. That's some juvenile numbers. We can't stay at 2.4 thousand. We have to cross the 10,000 mark. Nice. I've seen the likes going up. Grand. All right. The nurses might be another one of the very, very difficult people to handle, because there have already been 100 nurses that have already resigned for this year alone. Our nurses are being poached by the larger countries. And this isn't something new. This is something very common in Trinidad for years now. Our nurses have regularly been poached. But when conditions become increasingly difficult here, and the demand for nurses become increasingly difficult out there, you're increasing your risk of losing more nurses. I'm trying to find the bonus they were giving some of these nurses to start off with, because some of these hospitals started firing some of their nurses for being unvaccinated. I find that kind of ridiculous. You had unvaccinated nurses taking care of patients all through the pandemic and they were fine. and all of a sudden now it's some disastrous. That doesn't quite add up to me. And if you're having a shortage of nurses, to fire them just doesn't make sense. But okay, they're doing that. They're firing some of their nurses to, because they were unvaccinated. But now the problem they're having is the obvious problem of supply and demand. Now you have way more nurses. You have way too few nurses, and you're demanding way more nurses than there are out there. So there were reports that some hospitals were giving nurses $40,000 cash as a sign-on bonus. 40,000, and bear in mind that's not TT dollars, that's US dollars. You're getting 40,000 cash, and that's just the start. That's your encouragement to come out here. And bear in mind, for most nurses, they will replant your entire family for free. And if you're a nurse, and I've spoken to some nurses, I have a fair idea why some of them may be hesitant. If you're a nurse and you are hesitant about being vaccinated, you didn't trust this too much, it's, whatever your reasons are, and then someone tells you that you have to take it in order to continue being paid in your job, you have no choice now. You must take it or you would be fired and you must lose your job. If you didn't want this thing anyway, it may start your mind thinking, okay, I didn't want to take this vaccine anyway, and now they're forcing me to take this vaccine, and they're forcing me to take it to do a job that wasn't going the best anyway. The nurses are complaining that they're still on contract. You have nurses with years of experience and they're still running on contract out there. That's not job security. Their pay isn't very high. That's not something that's very enjoyable. The conditions they get to work in isn't all that good. You go in some of our public hospitals and you're like, to be around these conditions all day could be a bit depressing. And then one of the main problems a nurse identified in a Newsday article was that they don't have much upward mobility. So if you're a nurse and you want to rise in the ranks, there just isn't that far to go in Trinidad. After you reach to a certain level, you have to wait till someone of the other older senior nurses retire or pass, and then you might get that job. But if you move out, if you move to the United Kingdom, they would sponsor you to go learn more nursing. And when you learn that more nursing, you're going to get promoted very quickly. And in that promotion, you're going to get a higher salary. So they're paying you to learn and advance your own career and then giving you a salary increase for it. That might be too much for Trinidad. And then now if you're a nurse who didn't want to be vaccinated, and now you're hearing that they're forcing that vaccination down on you, I think that's going to play on your mind some more now. I really think it's going to. You're going to start to wonder, is it worth it to really stay here? And what is going to happen if we have a large exodus of our nurses? What is going to happen? If you want a slight idea of how some of this might go, right now in Barbados, their nurses are striking for quite a few reasons. They're striking for multiple reasons. I'm not sure all of the reasons they're striking for, but multiple reasons. And since they're striking, their vaccination drive has shrunk to 50% of the rate it was before. 50%, just by some nurses striking. So if we have a large exodus of a relatively sizable contingent of our nurses, and very likely the ones that may leave might be the more senior nurses. So yes, there might be some nursing students, but who is going to a bunch of nursing students to staff the entire hospital? That's insanity. Things can't function like that. So in the long run, how would you tackle that? I'm not sure, because I'm not sure the government is capable of providing the same opportunities that the nurses would have elsewhere. It's just not feasible in Trinidad and Tobago. So how do you tempt these nurses to stay? How? They will bring in more foreign labor, Cubans, Venezuelans, etc. They could try, And if you do that, you would already begin to lose some handle on your healthcare system, because many of them may not be familiar with Trinidadian culture, neither Trinidadian language. Usually when you bring in a contingent of foreign nurses, they aren't there on the ward by themselves. They are there with a majority of local nurses, so it's much easier to happen. But if you just bring in a contingent of foreign nurses and someone gets in a fight on New Year's Day. Please don't get in a fight on New Year's Day, but it happens. Someone gets in a fight on New Year's Day, and some of the tree line pass, and they're still living, but they're running, and they run in the hospital, and they're trying to explain, boy, Harry chopped the man, and the poor nurse only knows Cuban Spanish. ¿Por qué? ¿Qué? No habla. That's the healthcare system cannot function like that. So importing foreign nurses may work for some, but it wouldn't work for all. I think they're going to have to find some way to sweeten up these nurses to get them to stay here and, okay, please just stay. This government has no vision past the tip of their nose. They're very backward. I don't fully agree with that. I think this government has a vision. It's just if we agree with the vision that they have. This move on the public sector will do more harm than good on a holistic scale. And that's kind of my view too. But here's the caveat to that, to me. I said this before. I'm not sure if the government is actually planning to fully go through with the measures and actually start furloughing employees. I think their intention is to get the vaccination rate high enough that they don't actually have to do that. And I don't know if they will, but I think that's part of the intention. And I said this before, but again, to some of those new in the life, I think, where was I? Yes, I think that's kind of the method of it, that the intention is to worry some people into going and getting the vaccination pretty quick, and then in the long run, they may pull back from the full harshness of the measure, because as someone said, the problems it might cause may be just way too large. And the caveat also to that is that what all of this depends on is the state the country will be in at that time. What would our COVID-19 numbers be? Now, even for me, some of the views I might have on some of the things, I may not be able to see it if we're seeing 50 people a day dying. If we're seeing 50 people a day dying, nearly anything the government says that they have planned to do to get some reduction in those numbers, people will be okay with. They will be okay because it's a disaster going on. But if you see one person every 2 weeks dying, then a lot of the measures are going to start to look preposterous. Like, why are we doing this? What's the point of this? It doesn't make sense. No one is dying. So I think that has a lot to do with it. So if you're in the public service and you're worried about your position and you want to know what is going to happen, you're worried about the future, your primary hope should be that as Omicron comes, what we're seeing in other parts of the world, it is really much more mild than the others, and the hospitalization rate and the amount of people that are dying, if those numbers drop incredibly, then there won't be much worry. At least that's the way I see it. I don't think the government would go through with very strict, stringent measures if we see a reduction in the numbers. And on the flip side, if the numbers don't reduce, well, everyone will be okay with those strict, stringent numbers. They are cooking the numbers. A guy died of gunshot and they labeled it as COVID. I don't know that to be a fact. I'm just reading in the comments there. But I've heard some of those accusations before. Here's where some of the problem lies. I don't know if I missed it in the press conference or if it changed or what. It's a question I'd like answered. If someone heard this answer, could you please tell me? I am not sure how we are checking our COVID deaths. Like, what is the stipulation for someone to be considered to have died from COVID? If there's no autopsy, then you can't really know if someone died from COVID. For example, in England right now, I'm speaking about things that I know for sure about. In England right now, I believe they consider it a COVID death if someone dies within 21 or 24 days, somewhere around there, of a positive COVID test. So if you test positive to COVID today and in the next 20 days you drop down and die for some other thing, you're considered a COVID related death. And I think that's ridiculous, personally. And I do not know what is the stipulation in Trinidad and Tobago, how they are checking our deaths. A family member reported it on news yesterday. Okay, I'd have to look into that. That would be very interesting. That would be very interesting. And that would seem to say that our country is doing similar to like England, and they're reporting anyone who tested positive for COVID and died within X amount of days, they're reporting that as a COVID death. And I don't agree with that. And I think some of that creates fear and it creates an incorrect picture. It creates a distorted image of the situation we're currently in. People, in order for people to make sensible decisions, they have to get correct information. They have to get the correct data. And if you're skewing the data and the deaths seem higher than they may actually be, people would not be able to make proper decisions. They're not getting honest data. So I hope that is not the case, but I would look into that to see how it goes. And my final article for today before I log off on the YouTube, and then don't worry, we'll stay here on TikTok Live and talk some more, is a very interesting article. Just a unique bit of a story I saw. And I think it lends to the reality of the way people think that the only reason someone doesn't do the thing you expect them to do is because they don't know about it. But no, people do what people do. For example, before I even get to that article, I found it very interesting. I passed through Shoguna's Christmas Eve, and the kinds of crowds I saw in Shoguna's, my day. And I saw newspaper articles about Port of Spain having large Christmas Eve crowds, San Fernando High Street having large Christmas Eve crowds, and that's just the thing. You think any one of those people in those crowds aren't aware about COVID-19 and the fact that we're in a pandemic? Yes, they're aware, but people do what people do. Even with all the information you give them, people generally still do what they do. To try and change what someone does, you have to change kind of who they are to some extent. All right. I want to know the total death rate for the country every day. Someone says pre-COVID it was around 250. So what is it post-COVID now? A firefighter that drowned at Mayaro was tested for COVID after the DMO pronounced him dead. Wow. There are some interesting stories coming up here. Okay, but my last story, so I can log off of the YouTube, is Philip Morris International to place new graphical health warning on all cigarette packs in TNT. PMI, Philip Morris International, has announced that the packs of all its cigarette brands in Trinidad and Tobago, L&M and Marlboro, will include a new graphical health warning. This is part of its continued commitment to abide with regulations and policies of the Ministry of Health. So the Ministry of Health has some new policies that you must show on the cigarette pack that this thing is so unhealthy for you. And I've seen it on so many packs before, and I've yet to see it affect even one smoker. Yes, they read it and then they go tapping the pack. That doesn't bother them. The information doesn't bother people. They could put graphical warnings all over. They could go and threaten this and threaten that and talk about the death rate. Generally speaking, people do what people do. And that's where changing minds comes in. And it's not as easy as it seems. It's really not as easy. Am I related to Kerwin Springer? That's again one of the most asked questions. I'm sure someone in the chat would answer it very soon. Yes, they're waking up the cancer. That's what I've heard. They tap the pack to wake up that cancer. All right, that's all the stories I have for now. I'm going to log off of the YouTube. So thank you if you were on YouTube and you logged in. Oh, there was someone on YouTube. Greetings, Mr. Joseph here. Thanks for viewing on my YouTube. All right, Let me log off of the YouTube there.